Blood belonged on a butcher's block, not on a woman's hem. But Ruth Collier stood on the auction platform with dirt and something darker staining the white dress that had been her wedding gown 3 years back. The sun hammered down on the town square like judgment itself. Virgil Gaines held the papers high so everyone could see. $847, he called out. His voice carried across the crowd of 40-some folks gathered to watch. Plus administrative costs, 7-year servitude contract, territorial law, all legal and binding. Ruth's hands gripped the rail. Her knuckles showed white against the weathered wood. She wore nothing but that dress and the thin gold band on her finger that caught the noon light. The creditors had taken everything else. Going once. Gaines raised his gavel. Ruth scanned the crowd. Not a face turned toward her with mercy. Going twice. Then a voice from the back, rough as gravel. I'll pay it. The crowd parted. Boots crunched through dust and someone's dog skittered out of the way. The man who'd spoken came forward slow and steady, like he had all the time God ever made, and wasn't about to hurry for anyone's benefit. Silas Brennan was 58 years old and looked every day of it. His face carried the map of hard sun and harder choices. He wore a dark shirt gone gray at the shoulders and a hat that had seen better decades. When he reached the platform, he pulled a leather pouch from his vest and emptied it onto the payment table. Coins hit wood with sharp little sounds. Gold eagles mostly, some silver dollars mixed in. They scattered and rolled and came to rest in a pile that said more than words ever could about a man who lived alone and saved careful. Gaines stared at the money, then at Silas. His smile came slow, the kind that didn't reach anywhere near his eyes. You buying a house servant, Brennan? The crowd went quiet. Even the horses stopped shifting. Silas looked at Gaines the way a man looks at a snake he's deciding whether to kill or just step around. He didn't answer, didn't need to. He reached for the servitude contract papers instead. Gaines pulled them back. $850 covers the debt, but the contract's already drawn. She signs, or the debt stands and I auction again tomorrow. I'm buying her freedom, Silas said. His voice carried no heat, no anger, just the flat certainty of a man stating how things were going to be. That includes the paper. For a moment, Gaines held on. His fingers pressed white against the edges of the contract. Then he let go, because 30 people were watching. And the money was real, and his reputation depended on appearing lawful, even when he wasn't. Silas folded the papers without reading them and tucked them inside his shirt. Then he turned to Ruth. She hadn't moved, hadn't barely breathed. Up close, he could see the fine tremor in her hands. The way her jaw stayed locked like she was holding back words, or screams, or both. The wedding band on her finger was thin as wire, worn smooth from years of wearing. Can you walk? He asked. She nodded. Then let's go. He offered his hand to help her down the platform steps. She looked at it for 3 full seconds before taking it. Her palm was damp with sweat and fear, but her grip was steady. When her feet touched the ground, she swayed once, caught herself, and let go of his hand quick as if it burned. Silas's wagon stood at the edge of the square. He'd left his horse tied loose, water bucket within reach. The mare was old but reliable, the kind that didn't spook easy. He helped Ruth up onto the bench seat, still not touching more than necessary to keep her from falling. From the general store window across the street, a woman watched. Margaret Gaines stood behind the glass with one hand pressed to the frame, her face unreadable. She wore a blue dress with lace at the collar that probably cost more than most folks in this town made in a year. When Silas glanced her direction, she didn't look away, just watched as he climbed up beside Ruth and gathered the reins. He pulled a canteen from under the seat and offered it. Water's fresh this morning. Ruth took it. The tin was cool despite the heat. She drank like someone who'd forgotten what water tasted like, then forced herself to stop and hand it back. Thank you, she whispered. Silas hooked the canteen back in place and clicked his tongue. The mare started forward, hooves clopping soft on the packed dirt. They rolled past the crowd, past Gaines, who stood on the platform watching with his arms crossed, past the general store, where Margaret's face disappeared from the window. The town fell away behind them. Dust rose in a thin plume from the wagon wheels. Sagebrush stretched out on both sides of the road, going on forever, under a sky so blue it hurt to look at. The heat pressed down like a hand on their shoulders. 3 miles out, Ruth finally spoke again. Her voice was steadier now, but carried an edge like broken glass. What do you want from me? Silas kept his eyes on the road. The reins sat loose in his hands, leather worn soft from decades of use. He thought about how to answer, about what truth looked like when you spoke it plain, nothing you ain't willing to give. She turned to look at him, really look, trying to read his face the way you read weather coming over the horizon. He didn't meet her eyes, just watched the road and let her search. I don't understand, she said. You will, he replied. The ranch was still 15 miles off, and the sun wasn't even close to setting. The ranch house sat low against the land like it had grown there instead of being built. Weathered wood, a porch that sagged on one end, windows that needed washing. Silas pulled the wagon up beside the water trough and set the brake. "This is it," he said. Ruth climbed down on her own before he could offer help. Her legs shook from the ride, but she stood straight. The white dress looked even more out of place here, ghostly against the brown earth and gray wood. Inside, the cabin smelled of old smoke and coffee and something else underneath. The particular emptiness that comes from a house with only one person living in it. Dust motes hung in the light from the windows. A table, 2 chairs, a stove. That had seen better years. Everything clean enough, but worn past the point of caring about appearances. Silas crossed to a door on the far wall and opened it. "This was my wife's room. You can sleep here. There's a lock on the inside if you want it." Ruth stepped to the doorway and looked in. A narrow bed with a quilt folded at the foot, a dresser with a cracked mirror, a window that faced east toward where the sun would rise. The air in there held a faint scent she couldn't name. Lavender maybe, or something close to it. "Where will you sleep?" she asked. "Barn's got a cot. I've used it before." She turned to face him. "Because of me." "Because it's right." He moved back toward the main room, giving her space. "There's a basin and pitcher by the bed. Water's in the barrel outside. Help yourself to whatever you need." Ruth watched him, still trying to understand the shape of this kindness. Men didn't just buy women off auction blocks and ask nothing in return. In her experience, men always wanted something. "I should read that contract," she said quietly. Silas paused. He'd almost forgotten about the papers tucked inside his shirt. He pulled them out, unfolded them once, and stopped when he saw how many pages there were. His jaw tightened. 17 pages for a simple debt? He handed them to Ruth. She took them to the window where the light was better and began to read. Her finger traced down the first page, then the second. Silas watched her face, watching for the moment when she found whatever poison Gaines had hidden in all that legal language. Outside, cattle lowed in the distance. The sound carried lonely across the empty land. A crow called once from the fence post and went quiet. Ruth's finger stopped moving. Her face went pale. "What is it?" Silas asked. She didn't answer right away. Just kept staring at the words like they might change if she looked hard enough. When she finally spoke, her voice had gone flat. "Page 3, paragraph 7. Silas moved beside her. He wasn't much for reading legal documents. They always twisted words until they meant the opposite of what they seemed, but he followed where her finger pointed. The words swam together at first. Then they came clear, sharp as a knife. Upon signing, indebted party forfeits all marital property claims, including land parcels acquired through deceased spouse, to be transferred to designated guardian for administration and settlement. "Your husband," Silas said slowly. "He had land?" Ruth nodded. The paper trembled in her hands. 40 acres, 8 miles east of here. Thomas bought it 2 years before he died. It's nothing but dust and rock and one water pump. One water pump. The only one for 50 miles in any direction. The words hung between them like smoke. Silas felt something cold settle in his gut. He'd seen men killed over water rights, seen whole families driven off their land when someone with money decided they needed what those families had. This wasn't about Ruth's debt, never had been. "Gaines," he said. "He came to me a month after Thomas died. Offered to buy the land for $200. I said no. The pump's worth 10 times that to the ranches around here." Ruth's hands crumpled the papers. He said, "I'd regret refusing. I thought he meant he'd raise my debt. I didn't know he could do this." Silas took the contract from her and read the paragraph again. Then he read the signature line at the bottom. "Guardian appointment. Virgil Gaines, designated by county authority." He appointed himself. Probably paid the judge to sign off on it. Silas's voice stayed level, but his knuckles had gone white where he gripped the papers. "Soon as you sign this, the land transfers to him. He'll sell the water rights to whoever's paying most. Railroad, most likely. They're surveying through here for a line to El Paso." Ruth sat down hard in one of the kitchen chairs. The wedding dress pooled around her like spilled milk. "I can't sign it. If you don't, the debt stands. He'll auction you again tomorrow, next day. Every day until someone buys the contract and forces your signature. Then I'll never sign. They'll make you." Silas folded the papers, creased them sharp. "One way or another, they'll make you." The cabin fell quiet, except for their breathing and the tick of the clock on the shelf. Outside, the sun had moved lower, shadows stretched long across the floorboards. Ruth looked up at him. Her eyes were dry, but fierce, the kind of fierce that comes right before breaking or right before fighting. "What do I do?" Silas walked to the door and took his hat from the peg. When he settled it on his head, his face had gone hard as the land outside. "We ride back," he said. "Right now." Doc Merrick's office sat above the general store, reached by a narrow staircase that smelled of carbolic and old wood. Silas knocked once and pushed the door open without waiting for an answer. The doc looked up from his desk where he'd been writing in a ledger. He was 60-some years old, with white hair, and hands that stayed steady no matter what they were doing. Those hands had delivered half the babies in the county and closed the eyes of the other half when their time came. Silas, he set down his pen. Didn't expect to see you today. Need your eyes on something. Silas pulled out the contract and spread it across the examination table. Ruth stood near the door, quiet as a shadow. Doc Merrick came around the desk and picked up the papers. His reading glasses sat crooked on his nose. He read slowly, turning pages with the careful attention of a man who knew words could kill as sure as bullets. The clock on the wall ticked loud in the silence. Outside, someone's wagon rattled past on the street below. Ruth's breathing had gone shallow, quick. Finally, Doc set the papers down. Where'd you get this? Bought it off Gaines. Auction this morning. And the woman? Ruth Collier. Thomas Collier's widow. Doc looked at Ruth then, really looked. His expression shifted from professional distance to something softer. I delivered Catherine, he said to Silas. I owed you better than what happened that day. Still do. Silas's jaw worked, but he said nothing. Doc tapped the contract. This is legal. Guardian clause especially. Territorial law allows appointment when a widow's judgment might be compromised by grief. He paused. Usually takes a judge's signature. Gaines is listed as guardian. He appointed himself through Judge Holloway. I'd bet money on it. Doc removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. Holloway owes Gaines for gambling debts. Everybody knows it. Nobody proves it. How do I break it? Silas asked. Doc was quiet for a long moment. The clock ticked 5 times, 6, 7. You can't. Contract's binding once she signs. If she doesn't sign, the debt stands, and Gaines can force the issue through the court. There's got to be something. Unless... Doc stopped. His eyes went to Ruth's hand where it rested on the doorframe. The thin gold wedding band caught the light from the window. Unless what? Silas pressed. She's still legally married? Doc asked. To the law, I mean. Widow, Silas said. Husband's been dead 6 months. Doc picked up the contract again and flipped to page 7. Marital property law, territorial statute from 75. A woman can't sign away land that belongs to her marriage without her husband's consent. He looked up. But she's widowed, so that don't apply. To the law, Doc had said, then added, or to God. The question hung in the air like smoke. Ruth's breath caught. Silas heard it clear across the room. I need to think, Silas said after a moment. You keep this quiet? Always have. Doc folded the contract and handed it back. You might want to talk to Preacher Keller. He knows territorial law better than most lawyers. Spent 5 years as circuit judge before he took to saving souls instead of judging them. The church stood at the edge of town, white paint peeling from the boards and a cross on top that leaned slightly south from years of wind. Preacher Amos Keller was sweeping the steps when they arrived. He stopped when he saw them, set the broom aside and waited while they climbed up. Silas Brennan. Been a long time since I've seen you near a church. Not here for salvation, Silas said. Most folks who say that are the ones who need it most. Keller looked at Ruth. Mrs. Collier, I'm sorry about Thomas. He was a good man. Thank you, Ruth said quietly. Keller gestured toward the door. Come inside where it's cooler. The church interior smelled of old wood and candle wax. The pews sat empty in neat rows facing the simple altar. Light came through windows on both sides, dust drifting slow through the beams. Keller's Bible lay open on the pulpit, pages held down by a smooth river stone. Silas laid out the situation in plain terms. The debt, the auction, the contract that wasn't really about debt at all. When he finished, Keller was quiet for a long time. His fingers traced the edge of the pulpit, feeling the grain of the wood. Frontier marriage law, he said finally. You know what that is? No. Out here, where there's no official registry, no county clerk within 100 miles, marriage can be witnessed by community. Intent plus public acknowledgement equals legal bond. He paused. Church ceremony helps, but it ain't required. What's required is 2 people making a commitment before God and witnesses. Silas felt the pieces clicking together, sharp and dangerous as a trap springing closed. If she was married, he said slowly, married now, not widowed, she couldn't sign away marital property without her husband's consent. Keller turned to face them directly. Contract would be void. Ruth's hand went to her throat. But I'm not married. Not yet, Keller said. He looked at Silas. You understand what you'd be taking on. This ain't just a piece of paper to fool Gaines. Frontier marriage is binding, real as any ceremony in any church in any city back east. Silas pulled a small leather pouch from his vest pocket. He'd carried it for 8 years, always meaning to bury it with Catherine's things and never finding the right time. He opened it now and shook out a thin gold ring. Catherine's, he said. His voice had gone rough. Married her with it in '68. Kept it after she died, case I ever needed to remember what mattered. And the plant number 2 paid. The ring sat in his palm, small and worn smooth, catching the light same as Ruth's wedding band had caught it that morning. Keller looked at the ring, then at Ruth, then back at Silas. This is your answer? Marry her to break the contract? I'm asking if it would work. Legally? Yes. Morally? Keller's expression was unreadable. That's between you and God. He turned to Ruth then. His voice stayed level, pastoral. If this man claimed you as wife before God and law, would you trust him to mean it? Ruth looked at Silas. The question stretched between them, heavy with everything neither of them was saying. 8 years of loneliness in his face, 6 months of grief in hers. The weight of choices that couldn't be unmade once they were made. I don't know, she said finally. Her voice barely carried across the quiet church. But I'd trust him more than them. They rode back to town in the failing light. The wagon wheels cut through dust that hung in the air like smoke. Neither of them spoke. Words felt too heavy for what they were carrying, too light for what they were about to do. When they reached the bank, the building stood dark except for one window on the second floor where Gaines kept his office. Yellow lamplight spilled out onto the street below. He's still there, Silas said. Ruth's hands twisted in her lap, fingers working against each other. Maybe we should wait. Come back tomorrow with the preacher, make it official first. No time. Silas set the brake and climbed down. Gaines will have you signing that contract by morning if he can, or he'll have the judge force it. He came around to her side and offered his hand. We do this now while he thinks he's won? The bank's front door was locked, but the side entrance stood open. They climbed the stairs to the second floor, each step creaking under their weight. Cigar smoke drifted down from above, thick and expensive. Silas pushed open the office door without knocking. Gaines sat behind his desk, ledger books stacked on either side like fortress walls. He had a cigar in one hand and a glass of whiskey in the other. When he saw them, his eyebrows rose, but his smile stayed fixed. Brennan, Mrs. Collier. He set down the glass. Come to sign the papers? Smart choice. We came to tell you the contract's void, Silas said. Gaines laughed. It was a short, sharp sound without humor. On what grounds? She can't sign away marital property without her husband's consent. Her husband's dead. Her current husband, Silas said. The words came out flat, final. Me. The smile slid off Gaines's face like grease off a hot pan. He set down the cigar, slowly, deliberately. Outside the window, boots scraped on the boardwalk, voices carried up from the street. Word was spreading fast the way it always did in small towns when something worth watching was happening. You married her, Gaines said. Not a question, an accusation. That's right. When? This morning. Dawn, on my land. Gaines stood. He was a tall man used to looking down on people. Show me the certificate. Frontier marriage. Don't need a certificate when you got witnesses and intent. What witnesses? Gaines's voice had gone sharp. Who saw this supposed ceremony? Before Silas could answer, footsteps sounded on the stairs, heavy and deliberate. Sheriff Hayes appeared in the doorway, hand resting casual on his gun belt. He was 40 years old and had been sheriff for 6 of them, all 6 of those years bought and paid for by the man who now stood behind the desk. Problem here, Mr. Gaines? Hayes asked. Yes. Gaines pointed at Silas. This man's claiming he married Mrs. Collier this morning. No witnesses, no preacher, no legal documentation. That sound right to you? Hayes shifted his weight. The leather of his gun belt creaked. Sounds like fraud to me. The word hung in the air like a rope. More people had gathered outside now. Silas could hear them through the open window. Murmured conversations, boots shuffling, the crowd growing. He caught a glimpse of faces pressed against the glass of the building across the street. Margaret Gaines stood among them, one hand pressed to her throat. Frontier marriage is legal under territorial statute, Silas said. His voice stayed level, but his jaw had gone tight. Been legal since '75. If it's real, Gaines said. He came around the desk, moving slow like a man who knew he'd already won. If you actually married her. But see, Brennan, I have 15 men who'll swear under oath you never left town this week, that you've been seen every morning at the cattle yards, every evening at the feed store. So either you're lying about the marriage, he paused, or you're trying to defraud legal proceedings, and fraud in property matters is a hanging offense. The air in the room seemed to shrink. Ruth's breathing had gone shallow, rapid. Silas felt sweat start down his back despite the evening cool. Hayes stepped further into the room. Marriage ain't registered with the county. I checked before I came up. No certificate filed, no witnesses on record. His hand stayed on his gun. That's fraud, Brennan. I'm going to have to take you in. On whose authority? Silas asked quietly. Judge Holloway's. He's downstairs right now, matter of fact. Came to witness Mrs. Collier's signature on the contract. Hayes glanced at Gaines. Seems he got here just in time. The trap was closing. Silas could feel it tightening like a noose. Gaines had planned for this, had corrupt law on his side, false witnesses ready, a judge in his pocket. The marriage claim would get Silas arrested. Ruth would be alone, vulnerable, forced to sign or watch him hang. Clock on the wall ticked loud into the silence. 5 times, 6, 7. The crowd outside had grown. Silas could hear them clearer now. Maybe 30 people gathered on the street, watching the lit window, waiting to see how this ended. Gaines leaned back against his desk, arms crossed. The cigar smoke curled it up toward the ceiling. Last chance, Mrs. Collier. Sign the contract, your debt's cleared, and your friend here goes home instead of to a cell. Keep playing this game with him, and you'll watch justice get served the hard way. Ruth swayed. The heat in the room, or fear, or both. Her face had gone pale, as her dress. She looked at Silas, question in her eyes. Question or apology, he couldn't tell which. Hayes moved his hand to his pistol grip. What's it gonna be, Brennan? You coming quiet, or do we make this difficult? Below, someone in the crowd shouted something. The sound carried up through the window, but the words got lost. More voices joined in. The murmur was growing louder, restless. Gaines smiled. Town's watching, Brennan. Watching you get what liars deserve. Watching this woman learn her place. One way or another, that contract gets signed tonight, and her land becomes mine by morning. He picked up his whiskey glass and raised it in mock salute. Should have stayed on your ranch where you belonged. Silas's hands had curled into fists at his sides. His breathing stayed controlled, but his knuckles had gone white. On the wall behind Gaines, mounted alongside framed deeds and stock certificates, hung a branding iron, old, decorative, but the message was clear. Everything here was property. Everything could be owned. Ruth's voice came out barely above a whisper. I'm sorry. She was apologizing for getting him into this, for being the reason he was about to lose everything. The sheriff's hand tightened on his pistol. The crowd outside pressed closer to the windows, and Gaines's smile spread wider, certain of victory. Then a voice came from the doorway. Not loud, but it cut through everything like a knife through cloth. Step away from that pistol, Sheriff. Doc Merrick stood in the threshold, medical bag in one hand. Behind him, pressed into the stairwell, were more faces. Townspeople who'd followed the noise and the gathering. The blacksmith, the feed store owner. Women from the general store. Not a mob, not yet, but something close. Hayes's hand froze on his gun grip. Doc, this ain't your concern. When a man's about to get arrested for trying to save a woman from legal theft, I'd say it becomes everyone's concern. Doc stepped into the room. His voice stayed calm, steady as his hands had always been. Especially when the Guardian papers authorizing this contract might not be quite as legal as Mr. Gaines claims. Gaines's smile flickered. The papers are signed by Judge Holloway himself. I'm sure they are. Doc set his medical bag on the chair. Question is whether the judge actually signed them or whether someone else did the signing for him. The room went quiet. Even the crowd outside seemed to hold its breath. That's a serious accusation, Gaines said softly. It's a question. Doc looked at him directly. One that deserves an answer before we start arresting people for fraud. Hayes looked between Gaines and the doc, his hand still on his pistol but uncertainty creeping into his face. The crowd in the stairwell pressed closer. Someone lit a lamp down on the street. More light spilled up into the office, making shadows jump and twist. Get them out of here, Gaines said to Hayes. His voice had gone hard. All of them. This is private bank business. It stopped being private when you made it public, Doc replied. You held an auction in the town square this morning. Whole county watched you sell that woman like livestock. Can't cry privacy now that folks want to see how it ends. Silas felt something shift in the room. Not much, but enough. The weight of witnessing. People watching, remembering, making their own judgments about what was right and what was just legal. He caught Ruth's eye and tilted his head toward the door. She understood. They moved together, slow and careful, past the sheriff who still hadn't decided what to do, past Doc, who gave the smallest nod, and out into the stairwell. The crowd parted to let them through. Silas heard whispers following them down. Is it true? Did he marry her? Gaines is trying to steal her. The land. But he kept moving until they reached the street. Outside, the evening air hit cool after the stuffy office. The crowd had grown to maybe 40 people now, spreading across the street between the bank and the general store. Lamps burned in windows. Children perched on their father's shoulders to see better. This was the most interesting thing to happen in months, and nobody wanted to miss it. Silas guided Ruth away from the crowd, around the corner of the building to where his wagon waited. His hands shook as he reached into his vest pocket. The leather pouch was small, worn soft from 8 years of carrying. He opened it and shook the ring into his palm. It caught the lamplight from the bank window above, thin gold circle that had been on Catherine's finger for 12 years before death took her. Here. He held it out to Ruth. She stared at it, didn't take it. I can't. You have to. It's hers. Ruth's voice cracked. Your wife's. I can't take a dead woman's ring. Silas looked at the ring, then at Ruth, the white dress she wore, the wedding band already on her finger from her own dead husband. 2 people wearing ghosts, trying to build something real out of desperation and dust. Catherine was a teacher before we married, he said quietly. Smart woman. Too smart to be stuck out here with just me and the wind for company. She wanted children, wanted a house full of them. He closed his fingers around the ring. When she died, giving birth to the one we almost had, I kept this. Told myself I'd give it to our daughter one day, if we'd had one, if things had gone different. Ruth's eyes filled, but she didn't let the tears fall. She'd want you to have it, Silas continued, and the law sure as hell will care about it. Ring on your finger, in front of witnesses, that makes it real enough to break Gaines's contract. He paused. What if this makes it real in more ways than that? What if you're stuck with me for actual, not just legal? Ruth looked at him for a long moment. The crowd noise behind them, the lamplight flickering, the whole town watching from windows and doorways. Then she held out her left hand, the hand that already wore Thomas's thin gold band. Then I'm stuck, she said. Silas slid Catherine's ring onto her finger beside the other one. It fit loose, hung beside Thomas's band like they were meant to sit together. 2 marriages, 2 deaths, 2 people trying to make something new out of what remained. Ruth looked at both rings, then up at him. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. We still have to convince them. Footsteps on the boardwalk made them turn. Preacher Keller came around the corner, Bible under his arm. Behind him, Margaret Gaines walked with her head high, blue dress rustling. Heard you might need a preacher, Keller said. And a witness, Margaret added. Her voice was quiet, but steady. One who knows her husband's handwriting well enough to spot a forgery. Silas felt the pieces clicking into place. Not just a desperate plan anymore, but something with weight behind it. Something that might actually work. Doc's still up there stalling, Keller said. But Gaines will push soon. Judge Holloway's down in the lobby with the contract, waiting for Ruth's signature. Hayes is trying to decide whose side he's on. He looked at Ruth's hand, at the 2 rings there. This real, or are we pretending? Both, Silas said. Keller nodded slowly. Good enough for God, good enough for territorial law. He shifted his Bible to his other arm. You ready to walk back in there and make this official? Ruth's hand found Silas's. Her fingers threaded through his, gripped tight, like she was holding onto the only solid thing in a world gone liquid. Together? Together, Silas confirmed. They turned back toward the bank entrance. The crowd saw them coming and parted like water. Someone whispered, She's wearing his ring. Oh, someone else. Is that a preacher? The lobby door stood open, lamplight spilling out. Judge Holloway stood inside, contract in hand, looking annoyed. When he saw them approaching with the preacher and Margaret Gaines, his expression shifted to something closer to worry. Upstairs, Gaines's voice carried down. Bring them back up here. Now. We're finishing this tonight. Silas climbed the first step. Ruth beside him, still holding his hand, Keller behind them. Margaret last, chin raised like she was marching to war. At the top of the stairs, Gaines waited with the sheriff and Doc in the contract that would steal everything if they failed. They filed back into the office. The crowd from the stairwell pressed in behind them, filling the doorway and spilling into the hall. The room smelled of cigar smoke and sweat and something sharper, fear mixed with anger. Gaines stood behind his desk like it was a fortress wall. His face had gone red, veins standing out at his temples. When he saw the preacher and his own wife among the group, his jaw locked tight. This is a private office, he said. His voice came out controlled, but barely. Sheriff, clear these people out. Hayes looked at the crowd, then at Gaines, then at the pistol on his own hip like he was weighing what it would cost to draw it. Mr. Gaines, maybe we should clear them out now. Nobody moved. The weight of witnessing again, heavier this time. 40 pairs of eyes watching, remembering. Some folks had pushed into the room itself. The blacksmith stood near the window, 2 women from the boarding house, the feed store owner and his son, all of them silent but present, and their presence changed everything. Gaines slammed his hand on the desk. The sound cracked through the room like a gunshot. Fine. You want to watch? Watch this. As he pointed at Silas. This man is a liar and a fraud. He claims he married Mrs. Collier this morning, but I have 15 witnesses who'll swear under oath he never left town. He was at the cattle yards at dawn, at the feed store by noon, every day this week, in town, where people saw him. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, doubt creeping in. Silas felt it like cold water. He's trying to steal this woman's property through a fake marriage, Gaines continued. His voice rose, carrying the righteous anger of a man whose reputation was built on appearing honest. Trying to use her, manipulate her, claim her land for himself by pretending to be her husband. And when I expose him, he'll lose everything. His ranch, his freedom, maybe his life. More murmurs. Heads turning to look at Silas with suspicion now. The story made sense the way Gaines told it, made Silas into the villain and Gaines into the protector of law and order. Ruth's hand tightened on Silas's arm. Her other hand touched the 2 rings on her finger like they were a prayer. I have the county judge here, Gaines said, gesturing toward Judge Holloway, who stood in the corner looking uncomfortable. I have the sheriff. I have witnesses who will testify Brennan's lying. What do you have? He looked directly at Silas. A stolen ring and a woman desperate enough to go along with anything? The room held its breath, clock ticking on the wall. Someone coughed in the hallway. A baby cried somewhere down on the street. Silas started to speak, but Gaines cut him off. I'll even give you one more chance, Brennan. Walk away now. Leave the woman to sign the contract like she should have hours ago. Do that, and I won't press charges. You go back to your ranch, forget this ever happened, and we all move on. It was a good offer, a way out that would save Silas's skin, and everyone in the room knew it. Otherwise, Gaines continued, I have 15 men who'll swear you're a liar. He picked up his whiskey glass and took a slow sip. Who's going to believe you over them? The silence stretched. Gaines was winning. You could feel it in the way some folks in the crowd shifted their weight, looked at their boots, started thinking about heading home before this got uglier. Then Margaret Gaines spoke. I will. Her voice cut through the quiet like a knife through paper. Every head turned. She stood near the door, hands folded in front of her, the blue dress with its expensive lace, the careful posture of a woman who'd spent 20 years being perfect in public. But her eyes had gone hard. Margaret, Gaines said, a warning. Go home. I'll believe him, she repeated, louder this time. Because I know what you are, Virgil. I know what you're capable of. Gaines's face drained of color, then flooded red. You don't know what you're talking about. Don't I? Margaret took a step forward. The crowd parted for her like she was walking through still water. How many contracts have you forged? How many signatures have you copied late at night in your study when you thought I was asleep? That's enough. How many families have lost their land because you manipulated paperwork and bribed judges? Her voice stayed level, but carried the weight of 2 decades watching, knowing, staying silent. I watched you do it to the Hendersons, the Pritchards, 3 other families before Thomas Collier died. Gaines moved around the desk toward her. Hayes's hand went to his gun, but he didn't draw. The crowd pressed back slightly, giving them space but not leaving. You're my wife, Gaines said, low and dangerous. You'll regret this. I'm your wife, Margaret agreed. That's why I know how you forge signatures. I've watched you practice Judge Holloway's handwriting for 20 years. The room erupted. Not in shouts, but in gasps and sudden movements and the sound of 40 people inhaling at once. Judge Holloway himself went pale and pushed forward. What? He demanded. Doc Merrick stepped up beside Margaret. He pulled papers from his medical bag, the guardian appointment documents Gaines had used to claim authority over Ruth's property. He held them up for everyone to see. These papers, Doc said, appointing Virgil Gaines as guardian of Ruth Collier's affairs. They're signed by Judge Holloway. He looked at the judge. Did you sign them? Holloway took the papers. His hands shook as he examined the signature at the bottom. The room had gone absolutely still. Even the baby down on the street had stopped crying. This is my signature, Holloway said slowly. But I never signed these papers. Never saw them before tonight. Because I signed them, Margaret said. Every word came out clear, deliberate. I watched Virgil forge them 3 weeks ago, after Thomas Collier's funeral. He practiced the signature 17 times before he got it perfect. Then he filed the papers with the county clerk himself, paid the filing fee, made it all look legal. Gaines stood frozen. His mouth opened, but nothing came out. I kept the practice sheets, Margaret continued. She reached into her dress pocket and pulled out folded pages. All 17 attempts, in Virgil's handwriting, dated and kept because I knew someday this would matter. She handed them to Doc, who spread them on the desk. There it was, undeniable proof. Judge Holloway's signature practiced over and over in Virgil Gaines's hand, getting better each time until the final version matched perfectly. The sheriff moved then, not toward Silas, toward Gaines. Mr. Gaines, Hayes said. His voice had changed, gone formal and distant. I'm going to need you to answer some questions. Gaines looked around the room, at his wife, who'd betrayed him, at the crowd watching his fall, at the papers that proved his guilt. At the sheriff, whose loyalty he'd bought but couldn't hold against this weight of evidence. "You," he said to Margaret. His voice shook with rage. "You'll pay for this. Everything you have, everything you are, it's because of me. Without me, you're nothing." Margaret looked at him without flinching. "Without you, I'm free." The crowd began to murmur again. This time the sound was different. Approval, vindication, the satisfaction of seeing power broken. Someone in the back started clapping. Others joined. Not loud, not celebratory, just the acknowledgement that justice had teeth sometimes, and those teeth had just bitten down. Gaines's empire was crumbling. You could see it in his face, the way his whole body seemed to shrink. And Ruth still held Silas's hand, both rings on her finger, watching the man who'd tried to steal everything lose it all instead. The sheriff escorted Gaines down to the lobby. Hayes would hold him there while they sorted through the evidence, figured out charges, decided what came next. The crowd dispersed slowly, reluctant to leave, but knowing the main show was over. Folks drifted towards the street in small groups, already turning the night's events into stories they'd tell for years. Preacher Keller touched Silas's shoulder. "We should finish this properly. Church is open." Silas nodded. His throat felt tight. Words stuck somewhere behind his ribs. They filed down the stairs, Silas, Ruth, Keller, Doc, Margaret, out into the evening air that had gone cool while they'd been inside fighting. The walk to the church took 5 minutes. Nobody spoke. Their boots crunched on the dirt street. A dog barked once from somebody's yard and went quiet. Lamplight burned in windows where families had settled in for the night, unaware or uncaring about what had happened at the bank. When they reached the church, Keller unlocked the door and went inside to light the lamps. Doc and Margaret waited on the steps, giving Silas and Ruth a moment alone. Ruth still wore the white dress, still had both rings on her finger. She looked exhausted, hollowed out from fear and relief and everything between. "You should rest," Silas said quietly. "Not yet." She touched the rings. "We have to make this real first." "Legal." "It's already real. Gaines is finished. Contract's void. But we're not married. Not actually." She met his eyes. "The preacher said it has to be witnessed and meant. Before God, not just before the law." Silas looked at the church door. Light spilled out from inside where Keller was preparing. Beyond that, the altar waited, the place where promises were made that couldn't be unmade. "You don't have to do this," he said. "You're safe now. Gaines can't touch you. The land's yours free and clear." "I know." Ruth's voice stayed steady. "But you gave me your wife's ring in front of the whole town. You claimed me as yours to save my life. Least I can do is stand with you honestly and say whether I mean it or not." Before he could respond, she turned and walked up the church steps. Doc and Margaret followed her inside. Silas stood alone for a moment in the cooling dark. Then he went in. The church interior smelled of candle wax and old wood and something underneath, the particular scent of a place where people came to confess and pray and ask for forgiveness they didn't always deserve. Keller had lit 6 lamps. Their light pushed back the shadows but couldn't quite reach the corners. Doc and Margaret sat in the front pew. Ruth stood near the altar, waiting. Keller arranged his Bible on the pulpit, pages turning soft in the quiet. Silas walked slowly down the center aisle. His boots sounded too loud on the wooden floor. When he reached the front, he stopped and looked at the wall behind the altar. There, carved into the beam that held up the roof, letters cut deep enough to last. Catherine Brennan, 1849 to 1870. He'd done it himself the week after she died. Took him 3 days, working with a knife until his hands bled. Every letter a prayer. Every cut a piece of his grief made permanent. Ruth followed his gaze and saw the name. "You loved her."
Yes.
"Then why give me her ring?" Silas's fingers traced the edge of the pew in front of him, feeling the smooth wood worn by countless hands over countless years. "Catherine was a teacher. I told you that. But what I didn't say was she taught me more than she ever taught her students." He paused, searching for words that had weight enough. "She taught me that love ain't about holding on. It's about letting go when someone needs held more than you need to keep holding." Ruth's breath caught. Behind them, Margaret made a small sound, half sob, half something else. "I kept that ring for 8 years, Silas continued. "Told myself I was saving it for the daughter we never had. But truth is I was holding on to Catherine, trying to keep her here when she'd already gone." He looked at Ruth directly. "You needed that ring more than I needed to keep holding it. And Catherine," his voice roughened, "she'd have wanted you to have it." Keller cleared his throat gently. "Silas, Ruth, before we go further, I need to ask you both something." He closed his Bible and came around the pulpit. "This ceremony makes you married under territorial law and God's law. It ain't temporary. It ain't a convenience. Once you speak these vows, you're bound." "We know," Ruth said. "Do you?" Keller looked between them. "You met this morning. She was on an auction block, and you bought her freedom with a lie that we're about to make true." That's not love. Might never be love. What it is a choice. A hard one that you'll have to live with every day from now until one of you dies. And he paused. I need to know you understand what you're choosing. And the clock on the wall ticked into the silence. 7 times. 8, 9. Silas thought about his ranch. The empty rooms. The barn where he'd slept alone for 8 years. The mornings waking to nothing but cattle and wind. He thought about Catherine and the child they'd lost, and the weight of carrying grief until it became just another part of the landscape. Then he thought about Ruth's hand in his, tight with fear and trust mixed together, the way she'd said together, like it was a lifeline. The 2 rings on her finger, one from a dead husband, one from a dead wife, and how they sat together like they were meant to. I understand, he said. Ruth nodded. So do I. Keller studied them both, then opened his Bible again. Then let's begin. He looked toward the door. We need more witnesses. Legal minimum is 3. As if summoned, the door opened. The blacksmith came in first, hat in his hands, then the feed store owner, the 2 women from the boarding house, the doctor's wife. More followed, 10, 15, 20 people filing into the pews. Townspeople who'd watched the drama unfold at the bank and now came to see it finish properly. They sat in silence, waiting, not judging, not celebrating, just witnessing. Keller gestured for Silas and Ruth to stand before him. They did, side by side, not quite touching. The preacher raised his voice so everyone could hear. Dearly beloved and legal witnesses, he began. We gather tonight not in joy but in necessity, not in celebration but in truth. He paused. These 2 souls come before God in community to make honest what circumstance forced them to claim dishonestly. They come freely, without coercion, to bind themselves in marriage, as the law requires and as their hearts allow. He turned to Ruth. Ruth Collier, do you come here of your own will? No man forcing you, no fear driving you, nothing but your own choice? Ruth's voice came clear. I do. And do you accept Silas Brennan as your husband? Knowing what that bond means, knowing it lasts until death, through hardship and ease, through stranger and familiar, she looked at Silas. Really looked like she was seeing him for the first time. The weathered face and careful hands and loneliness he carried like a second skin. I do, she said. Keller turned to Silas. Silas Brennan, same questions. Do you come freely? Yes. Do you accept Ruth Collier as your wife? All that she brings with her, her grief, her land, her future. Do you promise to honor that bond as real, not as convenient? Silas felt the weight of Catherine's name carved in the beam above them, felt the weight of 8 years alone, felt the weight of this moment where he could step back or step forward, and either choice would change everything. I do, he said. Then speak your promises before God and law, Keller instructed. The words that make this binding. Silas opened his mouth to begin the traditional vows. The church door slammed open. Virgil Gaines stood in the entrance, Sheriff Hayes behind him, looking apologetic. Behind them, a tall man in a black coat and judge's robes, the county judge from the capital, Judge Tolliver, not Holloway. This ceremony is illegal, Gaines shouted. His voice echoed off the walls. I have the county judge here. He'll prove everything you're doing is fraud. The congregation stirred. Some stood, others leaned forward to see better. Judge Tolliver walked down the aisle, his boots heavy on the wood floor. He was 60 years old, with iron gray hair and a face that had seen every kind of lie and truth the law could produce. When he reached the altar, he looked at Gaines, then at Silas and Ruth, then at Preacher Keller. I'll need to see the evidence, he said quietly. All of it, before this goes any further. Doc Merrick stood from the pew. Your Honor, I have the evidence here. He carried his medical bag forward and set it on the altar. From it, he pulled his guardian appointment papers, Margaret's practice sheets, and the original servitude contract. Judge Tolliver took them without speaking. He moved to one of the lamps and held the papers close to the light. His eyes moved across the pages slowly, methodically. The church stayed silent, except for breathing and the occasional creak of wood settling. After what felt like an hour, but was probably 3 minutes, Tolliver looked up at Gaines. These guardian papers. Judge Holloway says he never signed them. He's mistaken, Gaines said quickly, or lying to protect himself from. I have 17 practice attempts in your handwriting. Tolliver interrupted. He held up Margaret's evidence. Each one getting closer to Judge Holloway's signature until the last one matches perfectly. He paused. Did you forge these documents, Mr. Gaines? Gaines's jaw worked. That woman stole private papers from my home. They're inadmissible. Answer the question. The silence stretched. Gaines looked around the church at all the faces watching him. His empire built on reputation, and reputation was a fragile thing when truth had teeth. The guardian appointment was necessary, he said finally. Mrs. Collier was in no state to manage her affairs. Someone had to protect her interests. By stealing her land, Ruth's voice cut across his. She stepped forward, both hands clenched at her sides. My husband bought that 40 acres honestly. Worked it for 2 years before he died. That water pump is all some of these ranches have for 50 miles. You wanted to sell it to the railroad for $15,000 and leave them all to die of thirst. That's business, Gaines snapped. Legal commerce. You don't understand. I understand you tried to own me. Ruth's voice shook but held steady. That contract wasn't about debt. It was about making me property. So you could take what my husband died, protecting. Tolliver held up the servitude contract. This clause here. Upon signing, indebted party forfeits all marital property claims, including land parcels acquired through deceased spouse. That's not standard language for a debt contract. It's legal under territorial. It's exploitation, Tolliver said flatly. He set the papers down and looked at Ruth's hand. Both rings caught the lamplight. You're wearing 2 wedding bands. Yes, sir. Ruth held up her hand. This one was my husband Thomas's. I've worn it every day since he died 6 months ago. Never took it off. Not even when they took everything else at the auction. And the other? Catherine Brennan's, Silas said. He stepped beside Ruth. My wife, dead 8 years. I kept her ring all this time, gave it to Ruth this evening. Tolliver studied them both. You claimed you married this morning? We did, Silas said. At dawn, on my land. With what witnesses? None. Silas met the judge's eyes. Just God and our word. That's not legal, Gaines interjected. Frontier marriage requires witnesses, public acknowledgement. It requires intent, Preacher Keller said. He came forward, holding his Bible. And commitment before God. Witnesses help, but they ain't the foundation. The foundation is 2 people choosing each other freely. Tolliver turned to Ruth. Did you choose freely, or were you coerced by fear of losing your land? The question hung there like a blade. Ruth looked at Silas, then at the judge. I was afraid, she admitted, terrified. But Mr. Brennan didn't force me. He offered me a way out, and I took it because... She paused, searching for words. Because he was the first person in 6 months who treated me like a human being instead of property. Because he gave me his dead wife's ring not to own me, but to free me. Because when I asked what he wanted from me, he said, nothing you ain't willing to give. Plant number 1 payoff. Ruth's continuous wearing of her wedding band showed she never psychologically left her marriage, complicating Gaines's servitude claim. Plant number 2 payoff. Catherine's ring, given in front of witnesses, showed serious intent to create a new marriage. Tolliver was quiet for a long moment. Then he looked at Gaines. You tried to brand this woman as property. The words hit like a hammer. Silas glanced at the wall where Gaines's office had that branding iron mounted. Plant number 3 payoff, the metaphor made literal by the judge's words. I did no such thing, Gaines started. A 7-year servitude contract that strips her of land rights? Tolliver's voice went hard. That's not debt collection, Mr. Gaines. That's ownership with extra steps. And you forged legal documents to make it happen. He turned to Sheriff Hayes. You'll arrest Mr. Gaines on charges of fraud, forgery, and attempted theft. Hold him until the circuit court convenes next month. Hayes looked at Gaines, then at the judge, then back. His hand went to his handcuffs. Yes, Your Honor. Gaines's face went from red to white. You can't. I have rights. So does she, Tolliver said quietly. He picked up the servitude contract and held it toward the nearest lamp. This contract is void. The guardian appointment that authorized it was fraudulent. Therefore, any actions taken under that authority are null. He touched the corner of the contract to the lamp flame. The paper caught, curled black, and burned. He held it until the fire reached his fingers, then dropped it into a brass offering plate on the altar. They watched it burn down to ash. Plant number 4 payoff. The forged documents provided the legal evidence needed to destroy Gaines's scheme. The church smelled of smoke and hot metal. Ruth's hand found Silas's and gripped tight. Hayes moved forward with the handcuffs. Gaines tried to pull away, but the sheriff was faster. Metal clicked around both wrists. Margaret, Gaines said, looking toward his wife who sat in the front pew. Tell them this is wrong. Margaret stood slowly. The only wrong thing, she said, is that I stayed silent for 20 years while you ruined good people. She looked at Judge Tolliver. I'll testify to everything I know. Every forged document, every bribed official, every family he destroyed. Gaines's face crumpled. Hayes led him toward the door, past the congregation that had gone completely still. When they reached the entrance, Gaines looked back one last time at Silas and Ruth standing before the altar. You think you won? His voice cracked. You're stuck with each other now. You don't love her, Brennan. This was all a lie to save her land. What happens when you're trapped in a marriage you never wanted? The door closed behind him. His words echoed off the walls and faded into silence. Judge Tolliver turned to face Silas and Ruth fully. He's right about one thing. You two claimed marriage to break his contract. That worked. Contract's void, land stays with Mrs. Collier, Gaines faces justice. He paused. But now you have a different problem. What problem? Ruth asked. You declared yourselves married in front of the whole town. You exchanged rings, you brought a preacher, you gathered witnesses. Tolliver gestured around the church. Under territorial law, that makes your marriage legal and binding. Not pretend, not temporary, real. The words settled over them like snow. You mean... Ruth's voice trailed off. I mean, you're married, Tolliver said simply. As of the moment you claimed it publicly, before witnesses, with intent to create that bond. The ceremony we interrupted was just making official what you'd already done. He looked at them both. Congratulations, the lie became truth the second you spoke it out loud. Twist number 4. The marriage they claimed to escape Gaines is now legally binding and real. Silas felt the ground shift under his feet. He'd expected to save Ruth and walk away. Expected this to be temporary, a legal trick that would fade once the danger passed. But Tolliver was right. Frontier law didn't require paperwork or ceremony. It required intent and witness, and they'd had both. Ruth looked at him, eyes wide. We're actually married. Looks like it. We can't undo it? Not under territorial law, Tolliver confirmed. Marriage is binding until death or legal dissolution, which requires proving fraud or coercion. And from what I've seen tonight, you both came freely, knowing what you were claiming. He glanced at Preacher Keller. The ceremony's a formality now, but it would make things cleaner. You want to finish what you started? Keller stepped forward, Bible in hand. Might as well do it proper. The congregation shifted, waiting. Some folks smiled, others looked concerned. Everyone understood they were witnessing something that would become legend. The rancher who bought a woman's freedom and accidentally married her for real. Silas looked at Ruth. We don't have to finish this. Judge says we're already married, but maybe what? Ruth's voice was barely a whisper. Maybe we pretend it didn't happen. Maybe we go back to being strangers who are legally bound, but not... Actually... She stopped, swallowed. You gave me your wife's ring. You stood against the whole town. You risked everything for someone you just met this morning. That don't mean you owe me. I know. She touched the 2 rings on her finger. But maybe I want to mean it anyway. Maybe that's worth something. Silas felt his throat go tight. The church was watching, waiting for his answer. Catherine's name carved above them, Ruth's hand in his. The impossible weight of choosing to step forward or step back. He looked at Preacher Keller. Finish it. Keller spoke the words quickly. No long sermon, no elaborate ceremony, just the essentials required by law and God. Do you, Silas Brennan, take Ruth Collier as your lawfully wedded wife? I do. And do you, Ruth Collier, take Silas Brennan as your lawfully wedded husband? Ruth looked at him for a long moment. Then I do. Unless then by the authority vested in me by God and territorial law, I pronounce you married. What God has joined, let no man separate. Keller closed his Bible. The congregation let out a collective breath. A few folks clapped, tentative at first, then stronger. Doc Merrick smiled. Margaret wiped her eyes. Judge Tolliver nodded once, satisfied that the law had been served even if the path to get there had been crooked. I'll file the certificate with the county clerk tomorrow, Keller said quietly. Make it official on paper. Silas nodded. Ruth's hand stayed in his, both rings catching lamplight. They stood there for a moment, not quite sure what came next. Then Doc stepped forward and shook Silas's hand. Congratulations, he said. He meant it, despite everything. Others followed. The blacksmith, the feed store owner, women from the boarding house who hugged Ruth and whispered things Silas couldn't hear, but made her eyes shine. The church emptied slowly. Folks drifting back to their homes with a story they'd tell for years about the rancher who bought a woman's freedom and ended up married. Judge Tolliver was the last to leave. He paused at the door and looked back. Mrs. Brennan, he said. Ruth startled at the name. Your land is yours, free and clear. I'll make sure the county records reflect that. No one can touch it without your signature. And now, he glanced at Silas, your husband's consent as well. Thank you, Your Honor, Ruth said. Tolliver tipped his hat and left. The church fell quiet. Just Silas and Ruth standing before the altar in the lamplight, married and uncertain and bound together by choices neither of them had planned. We should go, Silas said finally. Ruth nodded. They walked out together, still holding hands, because letting go felt like admitting something neither was ready to admit. Outside, the night had gone full dark. Stars scattered across the sky like thrown seed. The wagon waited where Silas had left it. He helped Ruth up onto the bench, then climbed beside her and gathered the reins. The ride back to the ranch took an hour. Neither spoke. The silence wasn't uncomfortable, just full, heavy with everything that had happened in a single day. Dawn to dusk, auction block to altar, strangers to husband and wife. When they reached the ranch, Silas lit a lamp in the main room. The familiar smell of old wood and coffee surrounded them. Ruth stood in the doorway, still wearing that white dress, looking small and exhausted and real in a way she hadn't looked on the auction platform. "You should rest," Silas said. "Take the bedroom. No." Ruth's voice was firm. "You're not sleeping in the barn. Not anymore. This is your house." "It's our house now," he corrected quietly. She nodded. "Then we'll figure it out. But not tonight. Tonight I just—" She stopped, swallowed. "Can I have something else to wear? This dress?" "Catherine's things are still in the dresser," Silas said. He moved to the bedroom and opened the top drawer. Inside, folded careful, were dresses that hadn't been worn in 8 years. He pulled out a simple one, blue cotton, work-worn, but clean, brought it to Ruth. She took it and disappeared into the bedroom. The door closed, soft behind her. Silas stood alone in the main room. The lamp flickered. Outside, cattle settled for the night. The land stretched quiet in all directions. He walked to the window and looked out at the darkness, at the fence line he could barely see, at the life that had just changed completely. Behind him, the bedroom door opened. Ruth emerged in Catherine's dress. It fit loose but good enough. The white wedding dress was folded in her arms. "Where should I put this?" she asked. Silas thought about it. "Burn it if you want, or keep it. Your choice." Ruth looked at the dress for a long moment. Then she set it on the chair by the stove. "Tomorrow," she said. "I'll decide tomorrow." Silas nodded. He moved to the kitchen area and started making coffee out of habit. The familiar ritual: water, grounds, heat. Ruth watched him work, then quietly began setting out 2 cups. Not asking, just doing, moving around the space like she belonged there. When the coffee was ready, they sat at the table across from each other. Steam rose between them. The night pressed against the windows. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called once and went silent. "What happens now?" Ruth asked. Silas wrapped his hands around the hot tin cup. "We figure it out, one day at a time." "That simple? That hard?" He met her eyes. "We're married legal and bound proper. Can't undo it without proving fraud, and there wasn't fraud. Just desperation and necessity and 2 people making choices they had to make." He paused. "But that don't mean you're trapped. You want separate rooms, we do separate rooms. You want to work your own land, I'll help you build a house there. Whatever you need to make this bearable." Ruth's fingers traced the rim of her cup. Both rings clicked soft against the tin. "What if I don't want it to just be bearable?" The question hung in the lamplit air between them. "Then we see where it goes," Silas said finally. "No promises beyond what we already made. No expectations beyond respect and honesty. He searched for words. Just 2 people who chose each other once, seeing if they can choose each other again tomorrow, and the day after that." Ruth nodded slowly. She lifted her cup and took a sip. The coffee was strong and bitter and real. "Tomorrow," she said, "I want to see the land. Thomas's 40 acres. I haven't been there since he died. I'll take you. And I want to plant something. A garden, maybe. Something that grows." Silas thought about Catherine's garden, overgrown and forgotten. "There's a spot behind the house that used to have tomatoes. Soil's still good. Then we'll start there." They finished their coffee in silence. Not awkward, not lonely, just honest. When Ruth stood to go to the bedroom, Silas stayed at the table. She paused at the door. "Thank you," she said, "for everything today. Don't thank me yet. Being married to me might be worse than signing that contract." Ruth almost smiled. "I doubt that." She went inside and closed the door soft. Didn't lock it. The sound of that unlocked door meant more than words could say. Silas sat alone with the empty cups and the dying lamp and the weight of promises made. Outside, the land waited for morning. Inside, 2 lives had tangled together in ways neither understood yet. But they had time. Time to figure it out. Time to see if necessity could become something else. Time to learn if a marriage born from lies could grow into truth. The lamp burned down. Silas finally stood, washed both cups, and made his way to the barn. Tomorrow he'd move back into the house proper. But tonight, he needed one more night of familiar space before everything changed for good. When he lay down on the cot, he could see stars through the barn door. Same stars that had watched him for 8 years. Same land, same life. But different now. All of it different. And maybe, he thought before sleep took him, different was exactly what they both needed. Some marriages start with love and stumble into duty. Others start with duty and stumble into something that might be love, given time and patience and 2 people willing to try. 3 months after the wedding, Ruth's garden gave its first tomatoes. Small and hard-won, but real. Silas carved her name beside Catherine's on the ranch beam, not replacing, adding. The way life adds to life when you let it instead of holding so tight, nothing new can grow. Doc Merrick said Margaret Gaines divorced Virgil while he sat in territorial prison awaiting trial. She took the bank, renamed it Collier Savings after Thomas, used the assets to help 3 families Virgil had ruined buy back their land. Some justice comes through courts, some comes through people who finally stop staying quiet. The 40 acres with the water pump stayed in Ruth's name. Silas signed papers saying so, clear and legal. When the railroad sent new negotiators, Ruth handled it herself. Got fair price, kept the pump, drilled 3 more wells for neighboring ranches with the money. Folks asked Silas if he regretted what he'd done. He'd just look at Ruth working the garden most mornings and say, "Regrets for things you wish you hadn't chosen. I chose. That ain't regret, that's living with consequences." Sometimes the bravest thing is making a lie true. Sometimes the strongest thing is accepting help without shame. Sometimes the holiest thing is 2 broken people becoming whole through respect before romance. That first tomato, Ruth split it with Silas at the table, seeds and all. Tasted like the future tastes when it's earned honest. The land doesn't care how love starts, only that it grows.